It's Galfi and Galfette. A lot of videos have already been released about the new Cubase version, but we'd like to take you on a tour of the new features together. Later on, we'll be making detailed videos on each topic. For now, let's take a quick look at the new features. For each new feature, if we have the information, we'll tell you whether it's present on all versions or not. To do this, we'll just use the initials P for Pro, A for Artist, and E for Elements. So if you see P, it's Pro only. If you see PA, it's Pro and Artist. And if you see PAE, it's for all versions. And if you don't see anything, it means we don't have the information. The first thing you see, in fact, is the new design. Overall, it's flatter. To see the difference between the new design and the old one, basically, flat is just two-dimensional. There's no shadow or luminosity effect like we had previously on the buttons. It's a term we use in graphic design, and so yes, it's not a big change, but it does look cleaner, crisper, you might say. The hub has been reworked a little. When you close a project, you no longer have that bar that stays at the top of your screen. Now when you close a project, it takes you back to the hub, and you have a little button to quit Cubase. The menu is now integrated into the hub at the top. One of the major new features is what's known as the track tab. When you go to a track, you see that normally in the inspector, there used to be inserts, sends, a whole host of possibilities. You still have these possibilities. If you right-click, you can choose what you want to display, but you'll see that some options, for example, are not available. That's because I'm on an audio track, so everything that's grayed out corresponds to MIDI and instrument tracks. But you can, for example, add chords, notepad, inserts, sends, equalizer, and so on, just as you used to do in the inspector. The big news is that in addition to the inspector, we now have a track tab here. It's a new window that you can resize. It lets you access the track's mixing options without having to open the track's properties as we used to do. For example, by clicking on the little E here, or without having to open the MixConsole. In fact, it displays the console's channel strip independently, which is really handy when you're working on a single screen. And the track tab is also customizable. Right-click and choose what you want to display, such as EQ or channel strip. What's more, clicking on the EQ thumbnail here opens the EQ in a pop-up window. And as soon as you move your mouse out of the pop-up, it disappears. Same thing for the channel strip. You'll see that here I've activated the noise gate. I click on it and it also displays a little pop-up. To make it disappear, just click outside the pop-up. Another new feature is the range tool. You can now use it on MIDI and drum editors, for example. We'll take this track, open it in the editor, which will also enlarge, and there you'll see that we now have the range tool and can therefore use it to copy or move selections. It's a lot faster than making a selection as you used to do with the selection tool, where you had to select and hope you hadn't missed a note. So here you can use the range tool. And to duplicate, you just do Ctrl plus D, or you can simply move your selection with the hand tool that appears. You can also select velocity or any of the parameters you've selected here, such as modulation, and move or duplicate your selection. In the MIDI and drum editors, you can also edit several parts and switch from one track to another. To do this, you have the Visibility tab here, where you can actually display all your tracks. Right now, I'm on the active track. You see, that's my piano track. If I switch to another track, it expands. And if I select my event, you'll see that the notes on the selected track appear in brighter colors than the unselected tracks. There are also a number of new plugins. For example, the vocal chain, which is specifically dedicated to singing and vocals and includes absolutely all the effects you could possibly need. It's divided into several modules: Overview, Clean, Character, and Send. Inside each module, you'll see that each effect has its own settings, and what's more, you can also, just by clicking on an effect, move it to change the order. There's also the return of the vocoder. I'm a relatively new Cubase user, but apparently in earlier versions of Cubase there was already a vocoder. It disappeared at least in version 12, so it's making a comeback. We'll definitely have to explore it, because there are a huge number of settings and possibilities, as you can see. The only thing I can tell you at the moment, because I haven't fully explored the vocoder yet, is that if you want to apply it to an audio track, you'll need a MIDI track to drive the vocoder and apply it to the audio track. You'll see that we've also introduced two new compressors, the Vox Comp, which is a dedicated vocal compressor that's really very simple, as you only need 3 controls. You can also use it with percussive elements like kick or snare, and of course, you've still got presets. The other compressor is the Black Valve. It's a compressor that adds a great deal of warmth and character, notably thanks to the drive here, which will impact the input signal, at which you can then compress, of course. Still in effects, you'll find 2 new equalizers, the M5 and the P1A. From what I understand, these are digital versions of analog compressors, but as I don't know the hardware versions of these compressors, I'd be hard-pressed to tell you whether these digital versions are faithful or not. The other advantage of these 2 equalizers is that they will color the sound. Up to now, in Cubase, we've only had neutral equalizers. We'll explore that later in other videos. There's also something new on the sampler track, as you can now insert variations in the shape envelope. If you activate pitch, for example, here you can choose from a number of shapes, such as this one, and using the pencil, and you can add it wherever you like. And of course, these new shapes are editable. You also have these options in the filters and amp sections. One of the big new features is the MixConsole, which has been completely redesigned. You can clearly see the new design when you compare it with the console from version 12. You now have the track name at the very bottom and very top of each slice, and this, on the other hand, is extremely useful because when you have a lot of tracks, it's much easier to find your way around. As for the track tab, when you're on the strip, for example, and you want to open an element, you click and this pop-up appears. You can make your settings directly in the pop-up. The same goes for the equalizer. Click on the thumbnail and it appears in a large pop-up. You also have many more options in the console window displays, and finally, right-clicking on a track will let you change the rack order. You click on a rack and you see this little green bar showing you where the rack will be inserted. You can now perform a mono-stereo conversion, which is only valid for group and effect audio tracks, of course. It's this little icon at the bottom, but you'll also find it on tracks, right next to track properties. You also have a new library, a complete orchestra, so it's the Iconica sketch. And it's true that the first tests I've made are rather interesting. I'll tell you more about it later in a detailed video. In the media bay, you have 5 new sample packs: Analog Wonder, Cinematic Electronica, Delicatessen, Midnight Dance, and Soulful. On the MIDI side, there have been improvements to step MIDI input. You can now change note length live with the keyboard arrows and add even more voices with polyphonic input. I'm not going to give you a demo. I'll give you a demo in a dedicated video later. You'll also notice in the transport bar at the bottom that we now have the tap tempo for simpler adjustment of the project tempo. You now have the option of recording CC commands with ramps rather than steps. Here I press ramp, draw a line, and you'll see that it's much smoother than when I use step mode. In terms of practical innovations, You can now zoom vertically with the mouse and keyboard. If you press Ctrl-Shift with the mouse wheel, you zoom in vertically. The video track now has track versions. If you work with images, clips, or films, this is an interesting development. Still on the practical side, there are the start modes. If you go to Transport, then Start mode, you have several options. The default is to start at the cursor position, but you can choose other options. You can also change modes during playback. For example, here I'm starting playback. I've selected Return to Start Position. When stop is pressed, I'm stopping playback and my cursor has returned to the start position. The key commands section has been completely overhauled, not only visually and graphically, but also in terms of navigation. You have default shortcuts, custom shortcuts, shortcuts that have not yet been assigned, and the search engine has been improved too. Another major evolution is the chord pads. There's more pads. So there are new presets. And you can now see that in this window on the right, you can display the chord editor once you've selected a pad, but you can also display the circle of fifth, or a list of corresponding chords, bearing in mind that the greener the chord, the more natural and logical the progression. You can also do it when selecting a pad. The other pads have a colored line at the bottom. To conclude this tour of what's new in Cubase 13, should you upgrade or not? I'm not going to advise you to upgrade or not, because quite simply, everyone's needs are different. So it's up to you to see whether the new features correspond to what you need for your projects. I'll tell you what I think though. If I'd initially had the Cubase 12 Pro version, I probably wouldn't have opted for the upgrade, or else I'd have waited for a big promotion like they often do at the end of the year during the holidays. That said, I'd already been planning to upgrade to the Pro version for a while, because a year on the artist version had shown me its limitations in terms of my projects and the projects I have with my band. And in the end, to upgrade or not, basically to go from version 12 Artist to version 12 Pro, it was $250. And to go from Cubase 12 Artist to Cubase 13 Pro, it's $330. So that's a difference of $80. And so I still did the update, but it's true that I'm not sure it's really essential. See you next week for more videos and to explore Cubase 13 in more detail.